I used to say the Grandview Hotel was stitched together with thread no architect could see. It wasn't the polished marble floors or the antique chandeliers that held it together. It was memory, small gestures, and the trust that each guest mattered. That was the fabric I had spent nearly 2 decades weaving, and I guarded it fiercely. The morning sunlight spilled through the tall lobby windows as I settled into my routine. I skimmed guest arrival notes, highlighted anniversaries, flagged birthdays, and double-checked that Sophia had ordered fresh orchids for the Ashworth suite. These were the rhythms that made the Grandview feel less like a hotel and more like a home. In my desk drawer, I kept a folded piece of stationery cream-colored, embossed with gold lettering. A week earlier, after I pulled strings to salvage their gala when a storm threatened to cancel it, the Ashworths had slipped me the note. Your dedication saved our event from disaster. We will never forget this. I had read those words 3 times before tucking them away. It wasn't the first thank you I had received, but something about it felt heavier, almost like a promise. That morning, the lobby doors parted and Darren Kell walked in, slim, tailored, 30-something, carrying himself with the confidence of a man convinced the world owed him space. He shook my hand briefly, already glancing past me at the polished counters. Old-school methods won't cut it here, he said, smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. We need efficiency, metrics, and modern solutions. You'll learn. Behind him. Hector's expression hardened, and Sophia shifted uncomfortably. They felt it too, the air changing. Darren's gaze swept over the handwritten welcome notes on my desk as though they were relics from another century. I forced myself to breathe evenly. This was only the opening move, but I could feel the storm clouds building. My instincts told me he hadn't come to preserve what we'd built, but to dismantle it. I slid my hand toward the drawer, brushing the hidden letter with my fingertips. Whatever changes he brought, I reminded myself, there were truths about loyalty and service no spreadsheet could erase, and soon, I would discover how quickly those truths would be tested. Darren's first full day felt like someone had thrown open every window in the hotel during a storm. He marched through the lobby as though the Grandview were his personal showroom, tossing orders with the ease of a man who had never had to prove himself. We're here to modernize, he announced, voice carrying across marble and glass. Your charming old methods are quaint, but irrelevant. His words cut deeper than he realized, because to me, those old methods were the lifeblood of this place. We sat down in the manager's office for what he called a strategic reset. His plan rolled out like a checklist of destruction: eliminate concierges, slash housekeeping staff, double room quotas, remove fresh flowers, replace handwritten notes with automated emails. His mantra, efficiency, trumps sentimentality, hung in the air like a bad smell. I studied the faces of my team as he spoke. Hector clenched his jaw. Sophia's eyes darted toward me, searching for reassurance I wasn't sure I could give. Darren only smiled at their unease, feeding off it. I tried to anchor the discussion in reality. I showed him charts of guest satisfaction, repeat bookings, and survey highlights. These touches aren't expenses, I explained. They're investments. They keep people coming back. He glanced once, then leaned back, arms crossed. Metrics are fine, he said, but we'll get better numbers with streamlined processes. Stick to your old ways if you like, but this hotel belongs to modern standards now. Later, Hector pulled me aside. His voice dropped. Megan overheard him on the phone. He said he's phasing out the old guard. He meant you. My throat tightened. It wasn't paranoia, he was coming for me. That evening, I sat at my desk with the weight of the day pressing into my shoulders. I began logging every change staff cuts, guest complaints, morale shifts. My notes filled page after page, a silent testimony against the storm sweeping through our halls. As I closed the binder, one thought anchored me: the Ashworths were due back soon. If Darren's changes continued unchecked, they wouldn't just notice they'd never forgive us. The days that followed felt like water wearing down stone. My suggestions were buried under layers of pending review. My emails met with silence, and my authority chipped away one small dismissal at a time. Darren didn't need to shout or fire directly. He only had to ignore me until the weight of irrelevance settled in. Housekeepers were now assigned double their usual quotas. Sophia confided that she no longer had time to train new staff properly. At the front desk, greetings were shortened, questions brushed aside, smiles rushed. It was as if the heartbeat of the Grandview had been replaced by a stopwatch. When the Ashworths arrived for their annual stay, I went to check their suite in secret. The room felt cold without the handwritten note on the nightstand, the orchids missing from the window, the downgraded toiletries lined up in neat but impersonal rows. Each absent detail was like a blade against the years I'd spent teaching my team that service was never just about the basics. It was about memory, intimacy, care. At the weekly staff meeting, Darren stood at the head of the table and smirked. "Old school ideas have no place in corporate hospitality," he said. "Metrics matter, procedures matter, feelings. Not so much." The silence was heavy. Even Hector, who usually spoke his mind, lowered his gaze. Afterward, Megan lingered near the doorway, her voice a whisper meant only for me. "He's consolidating power. You're on his list, along with the other managers who've been here too long." I nodded, masking my anger with calm, and later recorded every word. My hidden dossier thickened, a quiet act of survival. But as complaints mounted, as VIPs raised eyebrows at the changes, I felt doubt creep in. Maybe I was outdated. Maybe the world had moved past the values I held onto so tightly. That night, I pulled out the Ashworth's note, its ink slightly smudged from the many times I had unfolded it. Their words steadied me. This wasn't just about nostalgia, it was about preserving the soul of the Grandview. And I would not let it be erased without a fight. Thursday morning began with an unease I couldn't shake. Darren had called for an all-staff meeting, and the moment I saw the satisfied curve of his mouth, I knew why. He stood at the head of the room, arms folded like a judge ready to deliver a sentence. "Laura Vera is no longer part of the team," he announced. "Her position is eliminated effective immediately." The words hung heavy in the air. I watched Hector's jaw tighten, his hand gripping the edge of the table. Sophia's eyes widened, shimmering with disbelief. Around us, silence reigned, punctuated only by the faint hum of the overhead lights. I forced my hands to stay steady as I slid the few personal items from my desk into a plain cardboard box, framed photos of the staff from holiday parties. Industry awards we had won together, handwritten notes from guests who had trusted us with their most important milestones. Security arrived before I had finished. Their politeness did nothing to soften the blow. They walked me through the side corridor, away from the grand entrance I had crossed with pride for years. The humiliation was orchestrated, designed to remind everyone left behind what happened when loyalty and tradition clashed with Darren's version of progress. In the lobby, I caught sight of Eleanor Ashworth at the check-in desk. She raised her hand in a small wave, her face lighting with recognition until she saw the box in my arms and the guard at my side. Her expression faltered into confusion. I wanted to explain, but the moment was ripped away. As we reached the exit, Darren leaned close enough for only me to hear. "Old school managers aren't needed anymore." His words carried the finality of a door slamming shut. Outside, the warm Savannah air wrapped around me as I set the box in my car. I sat behind the wheel, staring at my hands. 15 years of devotion reduced to a cardboard box and a smirk. Yet even in that silence, I remembered the Ashworth's letter was still safe in my drawer at home, along with every record I had kept, and those papers would not stay buried forever. The morning after my dismissal, my phone buzzed non-stop. Messages poured in from the people I had left behind. Hector's words cut deepest. "Miss Laura, we're lost without you." Darren is forcing us to cut corners. Morale is collapsing. Sophia echoed the same despair. Guests are furious. Check-ins are chaos. It doesn't feel like the Grand View anymore. By midday, my inbox filled with something more unexpected, emails from loyal guests. Eleanor Ashworth wrote, "Our recent stay was disappointing, but your personal attention was the one bright spot. Is there someone I should speak to?" Reading her words, I felt a flicker of vindication. My methods hadn't been obsolete. They had been the glue holding everything together. That evening, I pulled out my binder and began working systematically. Every complaint, every resignation, every piece of feedback went into carefully organized files. What Darren dismissed as sentimentality was revealing itself in hard numbers, higher turnover, lower guest satisfaction, declining bookings. My so-called old-school methods were proving themselves in the stark language of data. Then Megan's message appeared, short but potent. James Carlton is scheduled to visit soon. Darren is nervous. The regional director himself was coming, and Darren's polished veneer would finally face scrutiny. My pulse quickened. For the first time since carrying that cardboard box out of the hotel, I felt the faint stirrings of control returning. But as I dug deeper, something even more troubling emerged. I cross-checked invoices against budgets and noticed patterns suppliers swapped for cheaper vendors. High-value amenities reduced but billed as premium. Funds shuffled between departments with no explanation. Darren wasn't just cutting costs, he was manipulating them. I gathered every document, screenshot, and receipt. My binder thickened with evidence that Darren's leadership was not merely a matter of clashing philosophies, it was actively destructive. When I finally closed the cover, I sat back in my chair, exhaustion pressing into me. But clarity too. What I held in my hands was no longer just a defense of my career. It was the story of a hotel being hollowed out, and I was the only one willing to tell it. The Ashworths had always been gracious. Never the type to complain. That was why Eleanor's tone unsettled me when she pulled Darren aside in the lobby. "Our suite lacks the touches we expect," she said, her voice calm but firm. Champagne missing, amenities downgraded. Her eyes flicked toward me, searching for an explanation I could not give in front of him. Darren smiled with the ease of someone who had practiced the line in the mirror. He launched into his corporate sermon, "Mrs. Ashworth, what you're experiencing are enhancements. We've standardized across all properties to ensure every guest enjoys the same level of luxury." He droned on about consistency, pricing models, and efficiency, words that rolled off his tongue but landed flat against Eleanor's polite skepticism. I stood to the side, silent, my chest heavy. The Ashworths had been with us for years. They knew the fragrance of the lavender sachets in their pillows, the brand of champagne they always received on arrival, the flowers Eleanor favored in her suite. Watching Darren reduce all of that history to a spreadsheet felt like watching a portrait burn. After Eleanor left, I slipped away and did what my conscience demanded. I ordered the champagne, the sachets, and even arranged their dinner reservation at their favorite restaurant. I paid for it myself, a small rebellion I refused to regret. Later, I left a concise report on Darren's desk outlining the Ashworth's concerns and how I had resolved them. The next morning, the report was back on my chair with a sticky note. "Irrelevant. Do not waste time on these extras." The silence that followed was worse than anger. It told me he had no intention of changing course. And as days passed, more emails from longtime guests arrived. They echoed the same refrain: the Grand View was losing its soul. I tightened my grip on my binder, already swollen with evidence. The Ashworth's disappointment wasn't an isolated event. It was a signal, one that could not be ignored. If James Carlton walked into the hotel tomorrow, he would see the chaos for himself, and I had to be ready when he did. The morning James Carlton walked into the Grand View, the energy shifted instantly. He wasn't a man who needed to announce his authority. It walked in with him. He toured the property quietly at first, glancing over guest comment cards, speaking with staff in hushed tones. The longer he stayed, the more unsettled the atmosphere became. Everyone knew this was no routine visit. I watched from the periphery as he spread reports across the conference table, his brows furrowed, declining revenue, rising complaints, repeat bookings in free fall. Darren hovered nearby, feigning confidence, but his fingers drummed nervously against the folder in his hand. Finally! James set the papers down and looked straight at him. "Where is Laura Vera?" The question cut the air in two. Darren's practiced smile faltered. "Fired her," he stammered. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. James leaned back, eyes narrowing. "My God, what have you done?" His voice carried no anger, only cold disbelief. I stepped forward, heart pounding, and placed my binder on the table. "With your permission," I said softly. James nodded, page by page. I laid out the evidence service metrics plummeting after Darren's changes, guest emails lamenting the loss of personal care, staff resignations, even discrepancies in supplier contracts. Each detail painted the same picture. The Grand View wasn't failing because of me. It was failing because of Darren. As I spoke, Darren's smirk disintegrated. The arrogance that had once filled every room with his presence drained away under the weight of facts he couldn't spin. James listened carefully, asking pointed questions that revealed his deep knowledge of hospitality. With every answer I gave, I felt the ground shift beneath me. What had been dismissal now became validation. When I finished, James closed the binder and exhaled slowly. His expression carried both disappointment and clarity. Darren had not only dismantled the Grandview's legacy, he had lied about why I was gone. And in that moment, I knew the tide had turned. What remained was whether James would choose to rebuild with me at the helm or let the damage deepen beyond repair. James called me into a smaller conference room after the review. The door closed with a finality that made the silence inside feel heavier than the chaos outside. He slid my binder across the table, the corners worn from weeks of carrying it like armor. "This is thorough," he said, too thorough to ignore. He asked me to walk him through my recommendations. I spoke plainly: restore staffing levels, reintroduce the personalized touches that had defined our reputation, reestablish training programs that built loyalty instead of fear. I explained how the Ashworths and other long-term guests weren't anomalies but anchors, their loyalty worth far more than any savings from Darren's cuts. James listened without interruption, occasionally jotting a note, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he leaned forward, effective immediately. "Darren is removed from operational duties. He'll face a separate review for the financial irregularities you've flagged." Relief washed through me, tempered by the reality of what lay ahead. Then James's tone shifted. More deliberate. "Laura, I'd like you back. Not just as assistant manager this time with expanded authority, full oversight to undo the damage and restore what made the Grandview exceptional." For a moment, the offer felt like a lifeline. But I also saw the broader horizon. The Grandview wasn't the only property suffering under these misguided policies. My work, my evidence, proved something bigger: that human-centered service wasn't antiquated. It was the foundation of lasting success. I thought of the Ashworth's letter, of Hector's texts, of Sophia's worried eyes. I thought of the staff members who had quit, the guests who had left, disappointed, and the quiet devastation hidden in the numbers. My humiliation had become my testimony. Every page of that dossier, every detail I had preserved, had transformed into credibility no one could dismiss. I nodded slowly. If I come back, it won't just be to fix the Grandview. It will be to help prevent this from happening anywhere else. James met my gaze and smiled faintly, as if he had been hoping I'd say exactly that. And in that moment, I knew the real work was only beginning. Walking back through the Grandview's lobby felt like stepping into a house after a long storm. The bones were still there, but the warmth had been stripped away. My first act was to bring back the people who carried that warmth. Hector returned to his post with his sharp eye for detail. Sophia came back to the front desk where her calm presence soothed guests, and Maria accepted an expanded role as executive housekeeper, her pride evident in the way she immediately set about retraining her staff. The changes were not instant, but they were visible. Flowers reappeared in suites, handwritten notes welcomed familiar faces, and staff meetings once again centered on relationships rather than quotas. I walked the halls daily, not as an overseer, but as a reminder that leadership meant being present. Within weeks, the sharp edges of tension began to soften. Staff greeted each other with genuine smiles instead of wary glances, and laughter returned to the break room. I reached out personally to the Ashworths, assuring them that the grand view they loved was being restored. They returned for a weekend stay, and Eleanor clasped my hands when she arrived. "This feels like home again," she whispered. Their words confirmed what the spreadsheets would later show guest satisfaction was climbing, and repeat bookings followed. The success didn't stop at the grand view. James shared my reports with other managers across the portfolio. Slowly, my methods once dismissed as outdated were adopted at sister properties. Hotels in New Orleans, Charleston, and even as far as Denver began reinstating traditions unique to their communities. The numbers spoke louder than any argument. Darren had made loyalty and revenue rose together when the character of each property was preserved. One evening, as I reviewed the latest satisfaction data, I realized the fight had shifted. This was no longer about reclaiming my place. It was about proving that the heart of hospitality could not be standardized away. And with every restored smile, every guest who returned, that truth became harder for anyone to deny. Months later, I stepped into an office I never imagined I'd hold. The plaque on the door read, Director of Heritage Property Integration. It was more than a title. It was a statement that the values once dismissed as obsolete were now guiding the future of the company. My role stretched beyond the grand view. I was entrusted with ensuring that every newly acquired property retained its spirit while still benefiting from modern efficiencies. The work was challenging, but deeply rewarding. In New Orleans, I helped a historic inn keep its jazz nights intact while streamlining reservations. In Denver, a mountain lodge returned to offering hand-signed welcome cards for its most loyal guests, something spreadsheets could never replicate. Each time I walked through a lobby and saw guests smiling at touches uniquely tied to that place, I knew we were getting it right. I also poured myself into mentoring. Younger managers, fresh from business schools, often arrived full of data points but little sense of the human element. I told them stories of Eleanor Ashworth's lavender sachets, of Hector's attention to detail, of Maria's pride in a well-trained staff. Efficiency is necessary, I'd say, but efficiency without care is hollow. Watching their eyes shift from skepticism to understanding reminded me why I had fought so hard. Meanwhile, Darren's legacy crumbled quickly. His fixation on metrics at the expense of people became a cautionary tale. In internal trainings, executives pointed to the Grandview case as proof that cutting corners doesn't build loyalty, it destroys it. What once had been my humiliation now stood as my vindication. Looking back, I realized the lesson was simple but costly. Standing firm in your principles can leave you bruised, but integrity and expertise eventually command respect. My binder of notes, my persistence, even my quiet refusal to sign away my voice, they had turned into the foundation of real change. As I left the Grandview one evening, pausing in the lobby that once felt broken, I saw staff chatting easily, guests laughing, orchids back in bloom. The heartbeat of the hotel was strong again, and with it, the path forward clear.